Discipline was never the first thing I learned in trading, kid. And if I'm being honest with you, it was the last thing I wanted to learn, because discipline doesn't feel heroic. When you're young and hungry, it feels restrictive, like a set of invisible chains wrapped around your ambition. And back then, ambition was the only fuel I trusted. In my early years, I thought discipline was for cautious men who lacked confidence, men who couldn't pull the trigger when opportunity knocked, and I mistook recklessness for courage more times than I care to admit. I came into the market believing that intelligence and instinct would carry me through that. If I watched closely enough and reacted fast enough, I could outsmart the chaos. But the market has a cruel way of exposing that illusion, and it does so by punishing you, not for what you don't know, but for what you refuse to control. My first real lesson in discipline came not from a catastrophic loss, but from a series of small victories that slowly poisoned my judgment. I had a streak, nothing legendary, just enough wins to make me feel chosen, just enough green to convince me the rules were suggestions rather than laws. I started skipping stops, moving targets, increasing size, because this one felt different. And every time I got away with it, the habit dug itself deeper into my bones. That's how the market traps you, not with pain at first, but with permission. It lets you break discipline just long enough to believe you're exempt from consequences, and then, one day, without warning, it collects every debt at once. I remember the trade that finally taught me what discipline really was. It was during a volatile stretch, one of those periods when price moved fast and news hit harder than expected. I had a clear plan written down before the session even opened. Entry, stop target size. Clean, simple, disciplined. And when the market approached my level, everything inside me started buzzing. Price hesitated, dipped slightly below my entry, and instead of waiting for confirmation, I jumped in early, telling myself I was being proactive. That was the first crack. Then price moved against me, straight toward my stop, and instead of accepting the loss I had already agreed to, I widened the stop, just a little, whispering to myself that the market was just shaking out weak hands. That was the second crack. When price kept bleeding, I added to the position, convinced I was improving my average instead of compounding my mistake. By the time the trade finally collapsed, the loss was far larger than it ever needed to be. And what hurt most wasn't the money. It was the realization that I had betrayed my own rules, step by step, fully conscious at every turn. Sitting there afterwards, staring at the wreckage, I understood something that changed my career. Discipline isn't about being right. It's about being consistent when you're wrong. Anyone can follow rules when trades go their way. Discipline only reveals itself when the market tests your patience, your ego, your need to be correct. And the market will test you relentlessly because it doesn't care who you think you are. Over the years, through the dot-com aftermath, through 2008, through the chaos of COVID, I watched brilliant traders burn out, not because they lacked skill, but because they couldn't submit to discipline. They chased, they revenge traded, they sized up emotionally, they broke their own rules in moments of stress, and every single one of them had a reason that sounded perfectly logical in the moment. That's the danger. Undisciplined trading always feels justified while you're doing it. Discipline, on the other hand, feels boring. It feels repetitive. It feels like saying no when every nerve in your body is screaming yes. And yet boredom is the price of survival in this business. I learned to respect discipline the way a pilot respects checklists, not because they're exciting, but because they keep you alive when conditions turn hostile. Every rule I follow today was written in blood, paid for, by losses that could have been avoided if I had just done what I said I would do. Discipline taught me to trade smaller when I felt emotional, to step away after losses, instead of trying to earn back my pride, to accept missed opportunities without chasing them like a starving man, to understand that no single trade matters enough to break the structure that protects me over hundreds of trades. And slowly, something shifted inside me. The urge to act began to quiet. The need to be right lost its grip. I stopped measuring my days by profit and started measuring them by execution. Did I follow my plan? Did I respect my risk? Did I act deliberately instead of impulsively? That's when consistency entered my life, not as a reward, but as a byproduct of restraint. Discipline didn't make me richer overnight. It made me harder to kill. It allowed me to stay in the game while others blew up accounts chasing adrenaline. It gave me the emotional distance to watch the market without feeling the need to wrestle it into submission. And here's the part beginners rarely understand. Discipline doesn't limit your freedom, it creates it. Without discipline, you're a slave to every tick, every headline, every emotional surge. With discipline, you choose when to act and when to stand still, and that choice is where real power lives. I've seen markets take everything from undisciplined traders in a matter of weeks, and I've seen disciplined traders survive decades with modest returns that compound into something unshakable. The difference isn't intelligence or luck, it's the willingness to obey rules even when they hurt, even when they feel unnecessary, even when your instincts beg you to ignore them. And as I sit here now, decades removed from those early mistakes, watching younger traders struggle with the same impulses. I once fought. I know this with absolute certainty. Discipline is not a trait you're born with. It's a muscle you build through repetition, humility, and pain. And every time you break it, the market will remind you why it exists. Because in the end, discipline is the thin line between trading as a craft and gambling as a habit. And the moment you truly accept that the market stops feeling like an enemy and starts revealing itself as a test one that quietly asks you every single day whether you are capable of doing what you said you would do, even when it costs you comfort, pride, and short-term gratification. And the traders who survive are not the ones who feel the least temptation, but the ones who have learned to sit with that temptation, acknowledge it, and still follow their rules. Because discipline, at its core, is the ability to protect your future self from the emotional decisions of your present self. And once that truth finally sinks in, you begin to understand that every successful trading career is built not on brilliant trades, but on thousands of small disciplined choices made when no one is watching. Choices that quietly shape your edge, your longevity, and your relationship with the market long before the results ever show up on a statement. And as I leaned back after years of fighting myself, more than the charts, I realized discipline wasn't something I added to my trading. It was the foundation beneath it, and everything else only worked. Once that foundation was strong enough to carry the weight of uncertainty, pressure, and time. Because without discipline, no strategy survives long enough to prove itself. And with it, even the simplest approach can endure through storms that wipe out those who never learned how to learn to slow down. Because the market doesn't reward speed, it rewards restraint. And as I continued down this road, trade after trade, year after year, I realized that discipline was not a switch you flip, but a habit. You reinforce, sometimes gently, sometimes painfully. And the real work happened far away from winning days in the quiet moments when nothing was happening, and boredom tempted me to manufacture action just to feel alive. Moments when discipline meant doing nothing and trusting that patience itself was a position. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that doing nothing has saved me more money than any brilliant entry ever did. There were stretches in my career when the market felt dull, choppy, uncooperative, and every fiber of my being wanted to force a trade to prove I was still sharp, still relevant, still in control. But discipline taught me to recognize those urges as danger signals, not opportunities, and so I learned to walk away from the screen, to close the platform, to protect my capital, not just from bad trades, but from my own restlessness. And that restraint paid dividends years later during periods of extreme volatility, when others were emotionally exhausted from overtrading, and I was still clear-headed enough to execute cleanly, precisely without drama. Discipline also changed the way I handled success, which is a trap far fewer traders talk about. Winning streaks are seductive, and they whisper lies just as convincingly as losses do. Discipline forced me to trade the same size after wins as after losses, to follow the same rules when confidence was high as when fear was clawing at my chest. And that consistency flattened the emotional swings that once controlled me. Over time, trading stopped feeling like a test of bravery and started feeling like a craft, something practiced deliberately rather than performed impulsively. And that shift brought a quiet confidence no big win ever could. I remember during the COVID crash when markets were moving in violent waves and emotions were raw everywhere you looked. Discipline was the only thing that stood between survival and self-destruction. I had rules about risk, about exposure, about when to stop trading for the day. And I followed them, even when the opportunities looked endless, because I had learned the hard truth that opportunity without discipline is just chaos dressed up as potential. While others burned themselves out chasing every move, I focused on execution, on process, on protecting my downside first. And when the dust finally settled, I was still standing, not because I was smarter, but because I had learned to obey my own boundaries. That's when it truly hit me that discipline isn't a moral virtue or a personality trait. It's a survival mechanism, a quiet agreement you make with yourself to respect the limits that keep you alive in an environment designed to exploit your weaknesses. And once you honor that agreement consistently, the market changes its character, not because it becomes easier, but because you become steadier. You stop flinching at noise. You stop chasing shadows. You stop confusing activity with progress. And one day, almost without noticing, you realize that discipline has done its work, that it has stripped trading down to what really matters: risk control, clarity, repetition, and time. And kid, if there's one thing I want you to carry with you after hearing this story, it's this: discipline won't make you feel powerful in the moment, but it will quietly build a future version of you who can withstand pressure, boredom, temptation, and fear without breaking. And that version of you is the only one who survives long enough to see consistency turn into mastery. And if this story resonated with you, if it reflected battles you're fighting right now in front of your own screen, take a moment to leave a comment with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so I can keep sharing the lessons the market spent a lifetime carving into me.